we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing the current market cycle. So the market's moving like this, it makes sense to take a step back and say, where are we in the market cycle? Like, what does this look like the most? Are we on track? Are we not? You know, are we getting a little bit too heated, or is this perfectly normal? And so that's what I want to do in this video. We'll talk about sort of the most likely path. We'll talk about a couple of other outcomes, but that's what I want to do in this video. The first thing to remember is how we got here. And how we got here was back in March, I said that Bitcoin would likely put in a series of lower highs over the span of about 6 to 9 months and then break out and go to new all-time highs. The reason I said that is because last cycle, it took about 6 to 9 months for Bitcoin to break out, right? We got a landing back then, right? After the breakout, we got a landing. So there is always a chance that something like that happens. It's not the outcome that you should be considering necessarily the most probable, but it is an outcome to consider. Again, no one knows what the market holds at the end of the day, right? Everyone thinks we know, but no one actually knows. We're all students of the market, and things can be, thrown off course at any moment. But what I would say is this, right? What I would say is this, is that when the unemployment rate came in at 4.1%, it made sense to assume the cyclical view would prevail. And I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks, right? And the reason why is because Bitcoin needs a reason to go down, not a reason to go up. If you look at the unemployment rate, you could argue that it was in fact the unemployment rate that was causing Bitcoin to go down, because while the unemployment rate was moving up quickly here, Bitcoin was going down. But as the unemployment rate came back down, Bitcoin started to go back up. And then Bitcoin paused here in early November. I said it would likely pause here, wait for the unemployment rate, and then make the decision. And that's exactly what it did, right? The labor market data to come in. The unemployment rate came in at 4.1%, and then Bitcoin broke out. And it makes sense because, again, the market needs a reason to go down, not a reason to go up. It goes up naturally because people just DCA Bitcoin. It needs a reason to go down, and that would be the labor market. The labor market was weak for a little while there, but then recently it started to, cool off a little bit. And Bitcoin can't wait forever, right? If the unemployment rate's not going to go up, then Bitcoin is going to go up. So that's why the cyclical view remains the most likely view. It could theoretically change if Bitcoin were to go back below 70K, right? If Bitcoin finds itself below $70,000, then there is a chance that the cyclical view ultimately won't prevail in Q4. But the reality, and by the way, when you look at the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin in Q4 of halving years, Bitcoin normally goes up in Q4 of halving years, right? That's when it normally goes up. If you look at the ROI from the low, Bitcoin around this time normally goes up, right? So the price action you're seeing by Bitcoin is actually really normal, right? This is what it normally does at this point in the cycle. It's not, something that's entirely unpredictable. It's what normally happens. This is what happened in Q4 of 2020, in Q4 of 2016, and in Q4 of 2012. So the cyclical view continues to be the dominant view. And so what I think makes the most amount of sense, as I've been saying, is to defer to the cyclical view, right? To ride that momentum until we really have a reason to believe the momentum's no longer there. And for now, it just seems like the easiest strategy. I've said for 3 years to stay Bitcoin heavy. Now that Bitcoin dominance hit 60%, I think it makes sense to hedge a little bit. And I already said that I have, right? I already said that I've already started to hedge with some ETH. And I know some people have a problem with me saying that because they're like, well, what about ETH going home? I can't get everything right. I value my portfolio in terms of Satoshis, not US dollars. I'll put out predictions about US dollars, but those will mostly be wrong. If the Bitcoin valuation goes to an area that I find attractive, then I start to diversify into that asset, right? I don't care if my USD valuation prediction comes true or not. So from here, the question, of course, would be, well, has ETH Bitcoin actually bottomed? Have altcoins actually bottomed against Bitcoin? And has Bitcoin dominance actually topped? One of the things I mentioned is that we would likely see a pullback by Bitcoin dominance after the second rate cut, because we saw one after the first rate cut, right? First rate cut, second rate cut. My speculation is this. I think that there will be one more move up by Bitcoin dominance that will finalize in December. But it is not clear if that will actually be a higher high or a lower high. If it's a higher high, I think it will only be a marginally higher high. It won't go that much higher, in my opinion. One way to visualize that is to look at Bitcoin dominance excluding stablecoins. So if you look at it excluding stablecoins, we've been talking about this for 3 years, that it would likely top out at around 65%, right? That's exactly where it went. I said 65% excluding stables and 60% including stables. And that's exactly where it hit. So for me, I'm satisfied for Bitcoin dominance. Like, I don't feel like it needs to go higher to make my view sound. I think that 60% is good enough. There is a reality that if it does something like this, it could go a little bit higher, right? Here in June of 2021, it hit a high, collapsed, and then went back up and then swept the high. So it is possible. And you want to know some other evidence that it's possible? Well, there's two. If you were to look at alt, and listen, guys, I know everyone wants to just go all in on alt seeds, and the reality is that altcoins, as long as Bitcoin keeps doing well, altcoins will likely keep doing well, right? And so if Bitcoin's riding the momentum, altcoins are going to ride it too. So ever since dominance hit 60%, I think it makes sense to be bullish on alt Bitcoin pairs. But there is one thing you should keep in mind. I remember back in 2020 distinctly when altcoins started to rally against Bitcoin in mid-November, right? They rallied in mid-November. If you look right here, this week was November 16th. They got a 2-week rally. And everyone thought, for the most part, that Bitcoin dominance had topped. But then Bitcoin dominance, alt Bitcoin pairs had one last drop into the end of the halving year, right? Going into the end of the halving year, they had one final drop that no one really was expecting. And then alt Bitcoin pairs durably went up. Now, it's possible that we're already at this point where they're already durably going up. But I just want to put that idea out there that there does exist a scenario where alt Bitcoin pairs drop one more time in December of 2024. And the other thing to consider too is that you could argue this is all still a mix of the cyclical view and the monetary policy view. Because remember, last cycle, we know that alt Bitcoin pairs did not actually bottom until the Fed began QE. Right? When they began QE, that's when alt Bitcoin pairs actually bottomed. So there's a chance that alt Bitcoin pairs are sort of doing the same type of thing, but they're just in this 2-week rally, right? A 2-week alt Bitcoin pair rally before then dropping one last time to mark the true bottom of alt Bitcoin pairs. There is a chance that that is what is going on, right? Whether you look at the cyclical view or the monetary policy view. So you might say, well, Ben, if all Bitcoin pairs were to drop, how would Bitcoin dominance not go much higher than 6%? Well, I think the answer lies with ETH Bitcoin. There is a chance that ETH Bitcoin has bottomed. I think there's a higher chance that ETH Bitcoin has bottomed than alt Bitcoin pairs, because ETH Bitcoin, historically, once it durably breaks down in years where ETH Bitcoin breaks down, once it breaks down below support, once it gets back above the 50-day moving average, the low is in, right? You can see that's what happened in 2019, is what happened in 2016. And now ETH Bitcoin is back above its 50-day moving average. So I would argue there is a good chance that the bottom for ETH Bitcoin is already in. I would point out that in November of 2020, ETH Bitcoin also got a rally, right? It got, and if you look at if you take a bar pattern on the rally that it got back over here, and you sort of carry it out, and then you overlay it with what's going on today, you can see that it basically got a very similar type of rally, right? It would correspond to maybe going up to 0.042, 0.043, which just happens to be, by the way, where the bull market support band is, right? Going right up to around 0.042 to 0.043. There's a chance that that happens, and then it goes down and puts in one final low closer to 0.03. I've often said by the end of the year, I've often said that 0.03 is the worst case scenario for ETH Bitcoin. 0.03. It's possible that 0.03 happens. It might not, and I'm not willing to wait for that. I think it already makes sense to own ETH, but it's possible that that happens, right? So I think the best strategy for now, as I've said, was to just follow the cyclical view until it gives us a reason not to, right? Don't fade the momentum. Fading the momentum typically doesn't work out, right? So go, defer to the cyclical view for as long as possible, because it's just the easiest strategy to defer to the cyclical view. And I've thought about that, and it's worked out so far this year, right? We set a 6 to 9 month drop followed by a breakout to new all-time highs. That happened. It just seems like the easiest thing to ride the ROI cycle, right? Ride the ROI from the lows, ride the year-to-date ROI. If you look at the year-to-date ROI, just to ride that general move and not worry so much about other outcomes. It just seems like the easiest thing to do. There are things that we could look at to make us worried, right? But that is the easiest thing to do. And that is likely going to serve you the best. Probably now, but also just in the future. In general, riding that is likely the best thing to do. More times than not.